Hello, and welcome to our PharmaPendium webinar. My name is Chris, and I am your host for today. I am here with our PharmaPendium expert, Pooja Jain. Pooja has both a master's degree in molecular biology and an MBA. She is currently a sales development manager at Elsevier and brings with her over 10 years of experience working in academia and the pharmaceutical industry. I would like to point out that we will place this webinar online so that you can listen to it again on your own time. During the session, you may send us your questions by using the chat or ask a question function on the webinar control panel. We will have 15 minutes for questions at the end, and for those questions we do not answer in the webinar, they will be included in a complete Q&A sent to all attendees by email. If you wish to have a full screen view, please click on the red arrow. Your control panel will be hidden. Click again on the red arrow to see your control panel again. That's it for now. Let's move on to PharmaPendium, and Pooja will show you how to use it. Welcome, Pooja.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and thank you all for attending this session. So welcome to the PharmaPendium webinar, where we will be talking about regulatory pathways and specifically how PharmaPendium can not only help during the filing process, but also how it can help in your strategic planning for pipeline development. This session will be divided into 4 main parts. Part 1 will be a brief introduction to PharmaPendium and the regulatory pathways. Part 2 will involve going through a live example of how PharmaPendium can be used to support regulatory applications. Part 3 will be in response to a poll that we will ask you to take and then do another live demo. Part 4 will end off with then Q&A from all of you. So now to begin Part 1. This webinar is intended for those who have some familiarity with PharmaPendium. However, just as a quick refresher, I will just provide a brief description of PharmaPendium. So what is it? PharmaPendium is the first product to offer both searchable FDA approval packages and EMA data. There are over 1.9 million searchable pages now available on PharmaPendium. It's used primarily for preclinical assessment and regulatory affairs, and we also have ERS data available. PharmaPendium is the first product to bring together both preclinical, clinical, and post-marketing data, with over 1.1 million extracted drug safety observations and over 1.3 million extracted PK parameter data in both the preclinical and clinical areas. We will be making reference to these during the presentation so that you can get a better idea of how to navigate PharmaPendium and get access to this material. So that said, we will begin the webinar on regulatory pathways. There are 3 main regulatory pathways that I would like to draw your attention to. First is the NDA, or New Drug Application, which I'm sure many of you are already aware of. Second is the ANDA, or Abbreviated New Drug Application, which is applicable to generic drug filings. And in relation to this chart, we have just put NDA and ANDA on diagonally opposite sides to indicate the differences in cost and innovation, but it is not meant to indicate that filing an ANDA has, for example, no cost. And lastly, we have the 505(b)(2) pathway, which is kind of like a hybrid between the 2 pathways already mentioned. For a fraction of the cost of getting an NDA approved, or more specifically a 505(b)(1) approved, this 505(b)(2) pathway relates to drugs which have an added incremental innovation to an already approved drug on the market. For example, taking an existing drug and then adding a new route of administration, which can be more beneficial to certain patient subpopulations. Let's take a bit of a closer look to see where these cost savings specifically come from. On this slide, you see the comparison between the 505(b)(1) pathway and the B2 pathway. Now, as highlighted by the red box, you can see that the majority of the cost savings come from having to save time from performing studies in both the preclinical and clinical phases. One of the main reasons why this is the case is that data can be borrowed in order to bridge studies to the innovative characterization of the drug. Hence, studies do not have to be repeated, thus saving on time and cost. This pathway has gained a lot of traction over the last few years in particular, with approximately 50% of NDA approvals last year being attributed to the 505(b)(2) pathway. We will focus on examples that pertain to the 505(b)(2) pathway in order to highlight how you can borrow precedent and comparative data, which can be found in PharmaPendium, to eliminate the need to repeat trials, thus saving you a lot of time and money. This will take us to part 2 of the webinar, where we will now go through an example. We will start off by looking up a drug that was filed for a 505(b)(2) application on the basis of a new formulation. This example will help briefly guide you in terms of how we can find information in PharmaPendium and in the approval packages. After this example, we will then conduct a poll to see whether you would like to see an example of how using PharmaPendium can help in filings related to new indications or new route of administration. So now, with that said, we will go to the live demo. All right. So let's say you're interested in looking at a drug which is being released by a company that has a new formulation on an existing anesthetic, and you're interested in knowing what others have gone through to get this approval. Well, you can start by going to the home page, which is shown over here, and typing in quotations so that we get the exact word searched: new formulation and 505(b)(2). We will then click Go, and we can see that we get 630 run results. We can then go under the Show Filters tab and select for anesthetics under the Drugs and Drug Class category. We then click Apply Filters, and now we've narrowed the results to 15. What's nice about this feature as well is that we can now go under Year and sort the results by the most recent results. Now you can see some familiar drugs, such as lidocaine, for example, but for the purposes of this demo, we will focus on the first result, articaine hydrochloride and epinephrine bitartrate. If I look at this result more closely, for example, the first result, I can see the phrase, the sponsor has submitted this NDA as a 505(b)(2) application referencing 2 approved formulations. This looks like an interesting example because it can really help demonstrate how sponsors borrow data from previously approved drugs. So I will click here to explore the findings even more. When I search through the document, I can actually find the reason for why the 505(b)(2) was submitted. Essentially, the sponsor is filing for articaine hydrochloride with epinephrine at 2 different doses, and is citing studies from the NDA where it was just articaine and epinephrine, and that drug was referred to as septocaine. The difference with the new formulation is that it has a higher liposolubility. Therefore, this can really affect the PK and PD profiles. Now, just as a side note, it is interesting to observe that articaine was first approved in 1976 in Europe. So it is interesting to see how people are using this reference drug even today to find incremental innovations which can improve clinical outcomes. PharmaPendium has over 4,000 drugs in its database, thus providing a valuable resource of information which can be accessed quickly to understand where incremental innovations can actually be made. So what we are going to do now is look through the document to see what we can learn from the sponsor's experience of filing a drug as a new formulation. Now, as we go to page 4 of the document, we can actually see the following statements. At the pre-IND meeting for this application, the sponsor was informed that the agency had concerns regarding differences in the product's formulation compared to their reference drug, septocaine. In fact, these concerns were so great that it actually states that if the sponsor is not able to address these concerns, then it could actually jeopardize the application. And here are the reasons that were of concern, listed over here: the sodium chloride content, the pH, and the fill volume. The reviewer stated that if the sponsor could give a good rationale of why the physiochemical differences would not affect bioavailability, then a waiver could be attained for waiving the bioavailability study. So now, if we actually scroll to page 5, in this top paragraph, we can actually see that the sponsor has provided data to address the concerns. Now, the gray boxes that you see here relates to data which has been retracted due to confidentiality issues. However, we can still see how the sponsor used the data in the reference drug as a basis for showing equivalence and thus getting the bioavailability study waived. For example, if we look at the statement that says, the sponsor also documented that the pH of the reference drug products, while at pH level X, whatever that was, as per the label at the time of manufacture, drops to level Y in 1 month or more after the manufacturing date. Thus, the actual pH of the reference drug product when administered is essentially the same as that of the new products. This resolves the concern raised by the review team. So here's an example of how the sponsor was able to borrow data from the reference drug in order to avoid repeating studies. Now, what if they were not able to address the concerns of the physiochemical properties adequately? Well, then they would have to pull up as much data as possible from the reference drug and then do bridging studies to include their own data and also this borrowed data from the reference drug. To find this data, all you need to do is click on the link here, which shows the drug name. And then what you would need to do is click on View Pharmacokinetics Data. And then you will see all of the bioavailability information relevant for the application, both in the preclinical and clinical areas. Now, it is important to keep in mind that all of these lines of data are literally extracted from the documents and presented in a manner which makes it easy for you to find information. And in the preclinical segment, you can see we've extracted over 800 lines of data, and in the clinical data, we've extracted over 500. If you were to do this manually going through the document, you can imagine how much time it would actually take you. So now let's go back to where we were and scroll down to page number 7. Under the heading Safety. We can now see how labeling is also influenced by the reference material that is submitted to the FDA. No new safety data needed to be generated for the filing as the reference drug information was sufficient. So it says here, Dr. Nikar has provided a summary of the safety profiles of the reference drug, which should be identical to that of these new formulations. She has recommended the addition of certain adverse events such as hypoesthesia, paralysis of ocular muscles, ischemic injury, and necrosis to the product's labels based on recent reports of the events seen with the reference drug. Now, this is very interesting as it indicates how referencing errors data can even help in establishing the proper label. To use PharmaPendium in this manner, a list of adverse effects can be found with PharmaPendium in order to get up-to-date information in this regard. In fact, if we click on the drug name again, all we have to do is go under post-marketing reports in the errors data. And we can see all of the information can also be found in PharmaPendium, thus saving you a lot of time. So that gives a very quick overview of how you can use PharmaPendium to support filings for new formulations. Now let's take a poll, and I will hand it over to Chris so that we can begin part 3 of the webinar.
Thank you, Pooja. Shortly, you will see a poll appear on your screen. Please pick one of the choices. You have about 30 seconds to do this. You have about 10 more seconds. Okay, Pooja, it looks like the results are in, and the winner is show me an example related to new efficacy claims.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. So what I'm going to do is go over that first example that all of you have chosen, and if time permits, I will also try to demonstrate an example related to new route of administration. So for this type of example, we can actually look at the example Salon Pods, which is an OTC drug that is currently available. Salonpas is a transdermal patch that is used for the treatment of muscular pain. And what people may not realize is that this drug was actually approved via a 505(b)(2) pathway. So if we go again back to the main page of PharmaPendium, we can type in Salonpas, and then click on the drug name over here, and go directly to the FDA approval package, as shown over here. Now here we can actually have the option of browsing the FDA package. So what we're going to do is type in 505(b)(2) and then click Go. To understand what were the requirements that the reviewers were looking for in order to get this drug approved. So here we see two results, and we're going to click on the first one, and we're going to land on the page which describes why this is being filed as a 505(b)(2). It says here that the applicant submitted a 505(b)(2) for OTC use of a topical patch product containing methyl salicylate and menthol. It also, if you look further, says that these ingredients were typically used for topical application in the form of ointments, lotions, or creams, but not patches. And as we scroll a bit further down at the top of the next page, we're going to go down to the next page, we can see that it actually says that the subject of this NDA is a new formulation. However, in a way, this is also a new route of administration as well, since the combination of the two ingredients wasn't before available as a patch. Now, if we're looking at efficacy claims or new route of administration, the sponsor had to provide several additional studies to support clinical efficacy and safety, such as a pivotal phase 3 trial, 5 skin safety trials, and 6 in vivo PK trials. Because there were a lot of studies that needed to be performed, let's take a look at what were the reasons why additional efficacy studies needed to be performed. So upon browsing of the document, we can see on the next page over here, in this paragraph that's indicated over here, which starts with Dr. Zhang, that the reviewer tried to cite data from the original NDA, but the reviewer said that the data was unreliable, so new PK data needed to be generated. So if in the future a company wanted to come in and make a new formulation to the Salonpas drug, this new data that will be generated can serve as supportive evidence as indicated in the paragraph here. To look at this data, all we need to do is click on the drug, similar to what we did in the previous example, and we go to pharmacokinetics data and see all of the additional PK data that needed to be generated. Interestingly, we actually see that there's no new PK data needed for the preclinical studies. This is largely due to the fact that they were able to borrow data from the reference drug. So here's an example of how we can find reasons for why they needed to carry out more efficacy studies. Now, given that we have a little bit more time, I'm actually going to also address the example for the new route of administration. So in terms of looking at information related to new route of administration, a good thing to check is whether there are any safety concerns when looking at a new route. If we scroll down close to the bottom of page 84, here I'm going to type page 84 to go directly to that page. We can see how the sponsor has actually not provided enough data to meet the requirements of the FDA for this transdermal patch to identify the risks associated with the use of this product for its real-world use. In this case, the PK and skin safety studies that were provided before actually do not mimic how the product will actually be used. Hence, bridging studies need to be performed to provide data on the safety of the patch, as it will be used by the OTC population. Therefore, the appropriate dosing intervals need to be established. For example, further down in the paragraph, down over here, we see one of their concerns, which is basically, it is not clear that in fact a single patch for 24 hours is worse than, say, a single patch every 8 hours for 24 hours. Then in the last sentence of the paragraph, it also says if the applicant performs a multiple dose efficacy study, we will obtain safety data from this study as well to complement the data we already have. Hence, they are still using data from the reference drug to now provide a comprehensive overview of what the data will actually look like in a real-world case. Now, if we click on the drug name again and go under clinical safety data, which is located over here, we can actually look at what additional data was generated under skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders. And this was to address the adverse events that may be present from using a patch. And we can see how the sponsor was able to address the dose type, and the route in this document. And as we scroll down, you can actually see that there are quite a lot of data that's present here, which can really help you when considering using patch as a new route of administration for, let's say, other drugs which are on the market. So overall, this is really important information to be aware of when considering similar innovations on existing drugs. And knowing how companies have structured their studies can help provide a lot of the strategic guidance that companies are looking for in order to save time and money. So this concludes our live demo. I will now turn it over to Chris, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Pooja. Well, we have plenty of time for questions. We would ask you to use your chat functionality on your screen if you'd like to submit a question. And I don't see any questions coming up yet. We'll give you a little bit of time to do that. Okay, I don't think we have any questions. So I think we will just conclude the session for today. Thank you for attending, and thank you, Pooja, for your presentation. Today's session offered in-depth information to solutions that PharmaPendium can provide. We are also offering introductory sessions throughout the year. The next online PharmaPendium session will be on the 25th of April, and in May we will offer another in-depth session. You will receive a link to the webinar calendar and a follow-up email. Please feel free to register for as many PharmaPendium webinars as you'd like. When you leave the session, a survey will pop up. Please fill out what your thoughts are regarding this webinar. Besides this, you will receive a follow-up email shortly, and we will place the recording of this session on the Elsevier Training Desk website. Many thanks, and good luck with further exploring of PharmaPendium, and we hope to meet you again soon.